I thought of this topic of microbial ecology of the Arabian Sea oxygen minimum zone for two reasons. Firstly, it is coinciding with the World Ocean Day celebration the KSTA is organized to talk about this year's theme being revitalization for the collective action for the ocean. Uh, I thought that I must sensitize the audience, in particular the Garden City University students, so much so that they understand the value of how the ocean is losing the oxygen and why it's going to be so difficult for the organisms living in the ocean. Plus, what steps can be taken to revitalize what is called our ocean. And therefore, I have divided my talk into first 15 minutes to sensitize the public in terms of having the public awareness creation mind. Therefore, I will be first talking on that. Next, I'll come to the topic that I have suggested Dr. Ramesh to kindly choose one. Next slide. Going back in time and enjoying our itihasas, I understand that the Samudra Manthan did not simply happen between the good and the bad, that it happened in order that the oceans had a mineral richness. And therefore, on the right side, what you see is all the aspects that came out of that. In fact, 14 of them is listed as far as the aspects that came out. And look at the left side panel. You see that they are rich in mineral wealth, plenty of food reserve, useful chemicals are available, aid and fire, the volcanic regions in the ocean bottom, and then therefore the unlimited wave and tidal energy, the beautiful ocean comparable to Apsara, and the ocean life, valuable plant life, the planktonic life sustains the whole of the food chain in the old oceans, and therefore its varieties of organisms are there, medicines come, also the deadly toxins, the powerful entity of the earth, that is because of the so-called the tsunamis and tidal waves that can happen. And also it's a source of precious thing. Above all, it is the treasure of all kinds of life. Therefore, it is away from mrita, it is amrit. Amrit is important for keeping the sustenance of the oceans going. Because the life evolved from there, it has to continue continuously in there as well as on the land. The vast ocean. This is an introduction and a public awareness creation as a part of the Ocean Day celebration. In fact, I want to also remind the students here saying that the idea of World Ocean Day celebration was mooted back in 1992 at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. So much so that the Canadian International Center for Ocean Development came up with this idea, but it took over another 16 years before the first official World Ocean Day was celebrated back in 2008. And from then on, we have been having series of themes. This year's being the revitalization of the oceans. And then this is the general information that I wanted to give to the students. We have 365 million square kilometers of the surface area of the oceans, and it's up to 11 kilometers deep in some places. The Earth's largest ecosystem, from viruses to whales, are inhabiting the oceans. And of course, from the daily salt that most of us consume to the entire navigation, transportation, global transoceanic cargo movement happens thanks to the oceans. And therefore, whether Samudra Manthan really happened in terms of modern oceanography equation or not, the ocean is a heritage for us forever. Looking at the right side panel, you will see I have given a small information on the Indian Ocean. That's about 70 million square kilometers area. It's among the smallest of the oceans, Pacific, Atlantic, Indian. And it is land bordered. Therefore, there's a lot of physical processes differences in the Indian Ocean compared to the open-ended Pacific or the Atlantic. And we don't have a North Pole touch as far as the Indian Ocean is concerned. And of course, the world's largest of rivers, some of them discharge up to 2 billion tons of sediment every year. And therefore, it's a basin full of lot of terrigenous sediments. Now, I wanted to information of ocean resources into this small slide, giving it the title of features, the resource type. The resources under the biological category can be microbes, flora, and fauna, and include they also biotechnologically useful one. The prospects are bountiful seafood. Unfortunately, that situation is changing. Maybe overfishing, as I said in the threats list. The climate change impacts are the first felt by the biology, and therefore we should be having to come up with the role of protecting and regulating and conserving our oceans, not only for biological purposes, but harnessing our chemical, geological, geophysical, and physical resources that come from there. And in the era that is technology driven, the development of technology, its refinement, and lots of applicable regulations and safety measures. For example, waves and tides, you can go on getting endlessly, but that's not the case with even if you want to desalinate the water using the reverse osmosis or any other techniques. This is a common man slide I wanted to put. That's because the World Ocean Day celebration is part of the business of everyone who is going to talk on the oceans to make sure that the common man gets the message of the importance of the oceans. And therefore, I want to, by my titling Oceans Sustain Economies, Communities and Lands, look at this, the transoceanic cargo or the Kairampan beach scene fishing method that we have learned in our college days, or the ports and harbors that have a huge role in transporting the materials across the world. And also the rain-making ocean god, Varuna, is extremely important. And then if you come to India's own mechanism of its resources, it contributes to the total, the EEZ is two-thirds of our land area. And then therefore, we have marine resources, which are seawater, fisheries, petroleum, minerals, and occupations in coastal areas are fishing, shipping, shipbuilding, ports, tourism, and also agriculture economy sustainer is the ocean drains. I'm just touching here the kind of importance the microbes and the other macrobiota that plays in sinking the carbon into the deep and therefore trying to cool the atmosphere as much as possible. And our mangrove forests are most important category in kind of absorbing several million tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The coral reefs are slow growing but carbon storing. And like that, if you look at the right side panel, the milky patches is the large bloom of a coccolitho 4, Emiliana huxleyi. It exports large amounts of carbon into the deep ocean, which will be residing for a very long time before the thermohaline circulation brings it back to the surface in some areas. But because of the circulation pattern, most of the time the cool waters come up and warm waters sink in what are called deep ocean water sinking locations in the Atlantic and also in the North and South poles regions. See, I wanted to also sensitize people on how marine life is variously influenced or affected by the ENSO events, the warming, acidifying, and deoxygenating ocean, the cyclones, also affect suddenly. For example, there's a rapid cyclone, it will churn up the waters come to the surface, the nutrient rich there, and therefore there will be photosynthetic production of primary production, which will give rise to some kind of a high chlorophyll, therefore some food that forms. The tsunamis and pandemics are havocing. And to my mind, the man-made pollution and our deficit to resolve the ocean as our common and long-lasting heritage and the policy vacuum in many areas is a big problem. The presently we are running what is called the ocean decade from 2021 to 2030. The 2 years have elapsed just because the pandemic. I hope they continue to kind of cover all the themes that they have planned for. The relegation is another big story of the man-made or mind-made problem. The ocean is not being really very well cared for. On your right side, I've given you the temperature, hypoxia, and pH reduction as the deadly trio. All of these have a very optimal range of values which allow the organisms to perform the best. Either side of the optimum, the organisms suffer. Therefore, the acidification which is happening rapidly should be very cared for by not polluting the systems. And we had the COVID curse in the last 2 years. The economies have been battered. And then I'm just trying to remind the entire lot of our fisheries friends that are present here. The small statistics on your top right, left side corner, we have 3,430 villages, 8.7 million fishing people, whopping 200,000 fishing crabs, 25 vessels per kilometer. I hope you guys will understand that it is a massive pressure. And we produce a lot of money. Of half of the income of the total fisheries sector, that is $800 billion, come from rupees come from the fishing activity from the marine sector. And we export mostly, or more than half of it, exclusively from the marine sector, including the aquaculture organisms. I want to also give a philosophical look at the chains disrupted. Both the supplies and suppliers get disrupted. The produce and producer getting disrupted. The consumer at the worst end. They sort of saw a food famine. The restaurant shut. The festivity ban happened. The diet fondness was lost. The very high cost. Above all, there was an employment loss across all the sectors. Therefore, the ocean's future, what we must also be worried is that it's not luxury anymore of the business as usual, because the several changes on the left side have put together. And I mentioned also the bioinvasions are also a problem. Over exploitation of the resource is happening, and people have to really take care of that. According to one of the estimates, up to 90% of the fishable stocks are exhausted already. And the noise pollution is bad for example, whales and dolphins and other cetaceans. The habitat loss in terms of our building ourselves into the oceans is a concern to me, as I have seen across the world how the sea shore and sea face spaces are, very wantonly occupied. The urban development that is haphazard is a problem. The coastal infrastructure not working out. And my question on why 2021 to 2030 carbon footprint from the fishing activity and then untreated sewage is still an issue. The Swachh Bharat has to become really Swachh. Therefore, from the ocean we currently have to own the ocean that we want, a lot of very planned and careful approaches are essential. I will not explain too much to our fisheries friends, but look at the red and the green dots on the right side. We take the rightmost, the upwelling region with a 20% transfer efficiency with a very short foot trophic level of 1.5 from a 1 billion ton carbon, organic carbon produced, we catch about 120 million tons of, not catch, that produces about 120 million tons fish. But then you go to the open ocean, the primary production fixes as much as 150, 160 billion tons of organic carbon The fish that is produced only is 101.6 million tons. That is because of the large number of trophic levels with very poor transfer efficiency. And look at the right side panel. I would like to plead the peoples in power and those people who all matter that we must have a collective ability to collect, assimilate, and analyze and disseminate the carbon, because carbon is the currency of climate change conundrum. Therefore, we must be able to understand its storage, its sequestration potentials, both in the terrestrial, coastal, and marine biota, and also the anthropogenic modulations of carbon fluxes into the atmosphere and hydrosphere and lithosphere. Quantify non-biotic carbon production. That is, for example, the fuel consumed also produces carbon, and therefore we must have cut down options. Thanks to the legislatures that are coming in the country, a lot of it is cut down, but a lot of it is still consumed. There we must have a balance about that. They must come up with strategies that will be making the non-production of the carbon much more, capture as much as possible, and refractorization, meaning that the carbon that is fixed, the carbon that is produced should be made so inert that it is not available for further processes. That way you store the carbon for a long period of time. Yeah, the theme, the 2022 theme, the revitalization, collective action for the ocean. My handwriting, it is written on a Petri plate back in 1987 from a bioluminescent culture that two, in fact, they one dull keep and they bright down, are the bioluminescent bacterial cultures that I work on my PhD. And on the right side is the picture I took in the Southern Ocean during our iron fertilization experiment. So therefore, I request ನಮ್ಮ ನಾಡಿನ ಮತ್ತು ನಮ್ಮ ದೇಶದ ಜನಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ನಾನು ಕೇಳೋದೇನು ಅಂದರೆ ಶುದ್ಧ ಸಾಗರ, ಸಮೃದ್ಧ ಸಾಗರ, ಸ್ವಚ್ಛ ಸಾಗರ, ಸ್ವಾಸ್ಥ್ಯ ಸಾಗರ. So therefore, let us resolve for the collective action for the ocean to be revitalized through this means of this. All these 8 S's is my own pioneers. Thank you. And now I'll shift to the current topic that I wanted to give. It's done for the reason, as I said, I wanted to tell you that the world ocean is losing the oxygen at a very rapid pace. The picture you see on the left side is one of the symposium that I was given responsibility to arrange back in 2016. And we had the world's best minds came to talk on the deoxygenated waters. What is the future of it? And I'm not going to talk much about it, just to show you that the world oceans, close to 10% of the total 365 million square kilometers, are already suffering the low oxygen concentrations. And because of the low oxygen concentration, there is what is called the other energy molecules are going to be utilized by bacteria and other microbes, which are the consequences due to the marine deoxygenation. For this talk, I have divided, for the students' sake, a bit longer introduction, because anything that you want to introduce to the terrestrial creatures from the marine systems, you need to tell them from seawater is salty to it is very cold in the bottom, can be as hot as your warm water, up to 32 degrees in the surface. And therefore, I have given emphasis on introducing the deoxygenation and the oxygen minimum zone importance, and then the consequences of the marine denitrification, which is the process that happens in the oxygen minimum zone waters. The features of Arabian Sea and its oxygen minimum zone, which is what I think is important. The phylogenetics or taxonomy of both bacteria and archaea, exclusively worked out from our own Indian shore and our own people. And that's what I want to emphasize. I also want to immediately suggest to the audience here that a lot of interest is there in Arabian Sea oxygen minimum zone. The people from Germany, UK, USA, You name other developed countries have come and invested their time and money to understand this process of oxygen minimum zone and how it functions, why it functions, or the way it functions. And then these are the some things that I would like to talk. So for the students, what are marine deoxygenated or hypoxic regions? So the dissolved oxygen in the marine subsurface waters close to zero or less than 63 micromole or about 1.42 ppm due to high demand of oxygen for degradation of organic matter by microbes. Organic matter oxidization is the fastest route for obtaining energy. Therefore, most microbes prefer doing the job. But when the oxygen falls down, like you see the stages of oxygen deficiency, you see hypoxia when the oxygen is as low as 1.4 ml per liter. Suboxia is close to less than 0.5 to 0.1 ml. And during both the cases, the nitrate concentration is quite high. The anoxia is when the oxygen is low and also the nitrate is gone. And that is the time when the sulfate oxidation reduction and sulfur molecule oxidation happens. And that is actually, you see in the bottom, the redox potential levels during the oxic, suboxic and anoxic reactions that happen. The oxidation process gives a lot of energy, close to, I think, about 28 ATP molecules are produced, whereas if it is to be under the anaerobic condition, it's just as low as 2 to 4, depending on the organism at hand. The type of hypoxia that you may come across are aperiodic. Sometimes they come at irregular intervals and may last more than a year. And some of them are periodic and shorter. That is what happens along the west coast of India during the immediately following our southwest monsoon. Let's say the persistent year-round hypoxia happens. It is the oxygen minimum zone example in the Arabian Sea I'll be talking about. There are also some seasonal and summer or autumnal stratification. The loss of oxygen, this slide is purely for reading for the students. Cause of oxygen minimum zone formation. See what happens, the intense biological production in the euphotic layer due to the right kind of nutrients available, due to the ideal levels of light, and also due to the planktonic generation time being shorter with the slush of nutrients. There is intense biological production in the top 100 meters. And that will lead to the microbes, the bacteria in particular, start enjoying this meal and start decomposing the organic matter, mostly during their leachates, exudates, and also some of the senile and dying organisms are quickly colonized upon and then they will be worked on. And the worst thing still is the physical processes like the lateral and vertical ventilation are poorer. In those regions only you can expect the oxygen minimum zones to form. The best known examples on the right side global format you see is the Eastern Tropical North Pacific and the Eastern Tropical South Pacific and the Eastern Tropical South Atlantic and also the Indian Ocean, Arabian Sea and Bay of Bengal are both famous for the oxygen levels lower than 20 micromole in some places at 300 meters. I'll show you some data on that. So the low oxygen concentrations make the hypoxia sensitive marine species to environmental stresses, therefore affecting their growth and reproductive success. Ultimately, some of them or most of them die, in fact. Oxygen depletion in suboxic conditions favor anaerobic remineralization, that is via denitrification, a process that is mostly happening in the Arabian Sea oxygen minimum zones. This denitrification depletes the bioavailable nitrogen that is essential for phytoplankton growth and releases the nitrous oxide, a major greenhouse gas that also contributes to ozone depletion. In the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about the what is the nitrogen loss is going to cause in terms of the phytoplankton growth. Therefore, OMGs are important marine ecosystems that impact and regulate the climate change. This is a slide that I wanted to compare the the composition of gases in the air and in the seawater. You look at that, nitrogen is 78% in the air, and it's only 62.5 or 6% in the seawater. And that, if there is a loss of this, because there are several requirements of nitrogen in terms of the amino acids, in terms of proteins, in terms of many of the backbones for the DNA molecules, and therefore it is an important element at the elemental forms, but on the molecular and compounds are essentially used up by the organisms. And Arabian Sea is reported to account for close to 40% of the total global ocean nitrogen loss to the atmosphere, which means it is estimated that nearly 400 teragrams of nitrogen is put out from the oceans into the atmospheres annually. 40% of that is 160 teragrams of nitrogen is ejected from a very small area in the Arabian Sea, which I'll show you later on. And as a part of the introduction and a summary of what happens when the oxygen levels get lower than or hypoxic level if they fall, it'll affect both marine life and biogeochemistry very variously. The biological impacts are loss of habitats, altered food web structure, reduced growth and reproduction, increased physiological stress, and pelagic migration. Many of the organisms move away from there, and vulnerability to predation and diseases, mass mortality of those at the bottom, the benthic forms, and therefore there could be shift to anaerobic respiration modes. Not all can manage this. Microbes and certain lower invertebrates may do, but not necessarily the nectonic life forms or the free-swimming ones. The biogeochemical impacts are once the oxygen is lower, and if the abundance of nitrate molecules, which is of course a lot in the deep ocean, especially in the very minimal oxygen levels, and therefore the nitrate is preferred as the electron acceptor, and manganese is a difficult thing, and also the energy yield decreases with the substrates the organism will choose. Therefore, nitrate is the most studied. The denitrification is the process most researchers globally look at to understand the microbial processes that happen in the OMGs. So I want to also make a strong statement here. There is a very strong linkage between the marine pollution and also the ocean oxygen deoxygenation, which means that you put more of organic waste into the water. They demand oxygen for the degradation and decomposition, and therefore the creation of more deoxygenated zones in the water. The Arabian Sea is an interesting open lab for us at the NIO at least, if not for most of the other scientists. Now we have a lot of oceanography interested institutions in the country, which are also having their own ships. They can go and do their research, and I'm glad that the ocean sciences are to a large extent supported by our systems. The Arabian Sea experiences semi-annual wind reversals. There is offshore upwelling, and also during December, November, and January time, there's winter cooling, due to which the surface waters become denser and sink, and because of the sinking, there is an nutrient injection into the surface, and what we call the deep mixed layer helps the primary production to happen better. Therefore, the offshore, there is higher primary and biological production compared to most other basins that the world experience. That's one of the important difference. And then the oxygen minimum zone with the intense denitrification is another characteristic of the Arabian Sea. Most importantly, thanks to the joint global ocean flux study program we had, led by one Dr. Madhu Pratap, we were able to understand how the nutrients during the southwest monsoon period of June and September are higher, and northeast monsoon, that is the winter time, also are higher compared to the March-May period, extremely low and stratified water. So with the nutrients being higher, there is more phytoplankton coming, and therefore you can expect more zooplankton biomass. Similarly, if you look at the right side corner, the nutrient input is lower during the March-May period, but there essentially the oxygen, the phytoplankton production is less. But because thanks to the microbes, the bacteria that me and my colleagues could quantify and measure their production rates, we came up with the idea that the low chlorophyll periods of March, May are supported elegantly by the bacterial food chain, I would say, which will be helping the omnivorous zooplankton to consume, so much so that on the top right side you see the biomass of the zooplankton does not change come season, go season. And that's the beauty of Arabian Sea paradox, which was a riddle until Martin Bars back in 1960s proposed, and until we published the work in Nature in 1996. I want to say that this is among the important contributions of the National Institute of Oceanography to the biology of our Arabian Sea. Yes, I also want to thank a lot of good physical oceanography scientists in the NIO, starting from, I just did not want to name, but I want to name a couple of them. LVG Rao, Dr. Satish Shetty, and my colleague, Dr. Prasanna Kumar. They have contributed a great deal in understanding the water mass and physical characterization. And of course, their groups and students. I'm sorry if I missed anybody. NIO guys, don't blame me afterwards. And they have been able to contribute. Dr. Naqvi and his team from late 1990s got interested in the Arabian Sea oxygen minimum zone region, and I think they took hundreds of profiles of nitrogen and nitrate, that is oxygen, and also the subsequent nitrate reduced product nitrite, and also the nitrous oxide they measured, and they have contributed significantly to the understanding of how the oxygen minimum zone in the Arabian Sea is supporting the denitrification process. On the right side, you see the oxygen profile in an OMZ. Starting from somewhere around 100 micromole in the surface, it decreases to something like very less to almost to non-detectable levels in the low oxygen zone, and the core is almost zero in the Arabian Sea, as you see the Naqvi's picture in the middle section. And with the deep ocean, the oxygen levels increase thanks to the North Indian deep water and also the Antarctic bottom water that come from there and that diffuse into the Indian Ocean equatorial water at around 1,000 to 3,500 meters, and they support lower oxygen concentration somewhere up to 1,500 meters. And I have given a blue arrow to the picture in the middle. That is to say that there are already 4 different or 5 different water masses in the oxygen minimum zone water. And I'm reminded of our Professor MPM Reddy when I speak on this. Recently, I had a talk with my colleague, Dr. Nagendra Nath, who told me that the sediments in the oxygen minimum zone region have predominant carbonate oozes with about 30 to 40% of shells And the best part for the microbes is close to 6% of the organic sediments is total organic carbon, which is supporting a lot of microbial activity down there. So the denitrification happens to, as you see on the left side, the intense biological productivity following upwelling leads to degradation of organic matter, leading to shortage of oxygen. Therefore, there is dependence on alternate electron acceptors, which is mostly the nitrate. And therefore, the denitrification to happen, there are three conditions. That is, when the ideal sources for the denitrification are available, the oxygen concentration is low or least, and then the electron acceptor substrates other than nitrate are also abundant. Other than nitrate are, for example, manganese, iron, and sulfate, etc. So the Arabian Sea and the coastal waters of India do have a kind of a bad news in terms of emitting a large quantity of nitrous oxide, which is a greenhouse gas. And as I said, the global ocean loses a lot of nitrogen, 40% of which is from Arabian Sea. In order to understand how the microbes work in denitrification and a process called anaerobic ammonia oxidation, I've drawn this, or in fact, put this slide starting from nitrate to elemental nitrogen through a pathway which is telling you the nitrate to nitrite to nitric oxide to nitrous oxide to elemental nitrogen gas. So there are two pathways. The one vertically blue is called the assimilatory nitrate reduction, and the one from nitrite to ammonia conversion is also. Let me say that how important the denitrification process in the oxygen minimum zones is what I was explaining as a basic information. And looking at the pathways of denitrification, I mentioned that the most preferred, although difficult to attack, the nitrate molecule is completely reduced to elemental nitrogen through a process called assimilatory nitrate reduction. And there's another pathway that is the conversion of nitrite into ammonium through a process called DNRA, which is giving rise to the anaerobic ammonia oxidation through a chain of genes and their products called enzymes made use of to produce the elemental ultimately. The important point to remember is that in the oxygen depleted waters, the kind of denitrification that happens is generating the nitrogen gas, which is a greenhouse gas, and Arabian Sea is known to contribute to a total of 40% of the global 400 teragram nitrogen loss that happens to the atmosphere. I also mentioned how the microbes are so very important in the biogeochemical cycling of most biologically essential elements, as well as the ones that are associated, how they are kind of bound to the other parts, and the matter gets into the ocean bottom and things like that. I have borrowed the data for the presentation from 4 different PhD awardees. One of them is Amara. The first one, she worked across the Arabian Sea from the coast to the what we call the Arabian Sea time series station, which you see in the third slide marked red in the center of that, the OMG delineated by Dr. Naqvi and his group. Then the second set of data came from one Genevieve. She looked at both Arabian Sea and Bay of Bengal. The third one is my own student, Mandar, who collected seasonal data from the Arabian Sea time series location and done a massive good work, I would say. And the other one is from the coastal area, Jasmine Gomes, who was in our project, and she worked with Dr. Aki Pande Parker, and then she contributed. The first student, Amara, I mentioned earlier, she worked with our own Belle Damodara Shanai, who currently is the scientist at Vizag Center of NIO. And he is one of the very leading microbial ecologists, I would say. They're working on fungal aspects of the ocean. And then they followed a lot of standard culture and molecular methods. And then you see we have the data collected. One Anand Jain, who worked with me, I must say that for phylogenetic analysis from the water column, we were the first set of Indians who did work on molecular taxonomy and understanding the functional roles of the Arabian Sea microbiota. Then Anand Jain, as a postdoc, did a commendable job of putting together a good data set that is helpful. And we were able to come up with a lot of different classes of organisms. And this work has come from the coastal waters. There are nearly 15 to 18 different genera of microbes the bacteria in particular were identified from the coastal waters. This is really, I would say, partial taxonomy, because it's only 1,500 clones were sequenced from this work. Not that we could not sequence more, it's because of the fact that the kind of data putting together and getting the clean say clones is another issue that we faced. But I don't want to read through all this the names of the organisms we found. Interestingly, we had the coastal waters covered from Goa, Mangalore, and Kochi. There is a small locational differences, seasonal differences. But having said that, close to 18 different genera of bacteria were identified from our coastal OMZ times. And this is the culture basis work done from about 400 DNA extracts that Jasmine could collect. In the Arabian Sea, the bacteria and archaea are involved into the denitrification and the anamox process. Some clades of bacteria capable of sulfur oxidation or reduction are also found. The anamox and sulfur oxidation and reduction, and also methane oxidation and reduction were exclusively done by archaea. The archaea are prokaryotes, the third domain of life, and they're exclusively anaerobic. The archaeal OTU identified from the core OMZ apparently involved in the nitrate, sulfur, and methane transformation. Next slide. Yeah, so then the next generation sequencing is a whole lot of good work, and from there we could find out a large number of operational taxonomic units in the core Arabian Sea OMZ. If you see at the rightmost column in the table top, it's the total OTUs picked. If you come to summer inter-monsoon and fall inter-monsoon and northeast monsoon, the samples were, the DNA samples were subjected to NGS, and each of them is giving some OTUs. The season-wise, there is hardly much difference in either 250 meters or at 500 meters. But between the depths, there is more diversity at 250 meters than at 500 meters. What it means to say is that the organisms involved in the, although in the core, the diverse organisms are there in the topper layer because of the availability of other organic nutrients for them to be sustained better compared to the ones that go deep. Henceforth, if you keep going downwards, even though there is oxygen in the deep waters, the diversity levels come down. That is the message. The next slide. Yeah, this in the next 3 slides, I'm showing the enzyme activities. The nitrate reductate activity was, and also the the nitrous oxide production were monitored from the coastal samples. What the most important points are the nitrous oxide produced ranged from 4.95 nanomole per day by Staphylococcus hemolyticus to about 119 units of the same nanomole per day by the Idiomarina sedimentium. And then the denitrification rates of culturable bacteria from a coastal location turning temporarily hypoxic. This is one of the standards work that was published in Journal of Marine Systems. Then functional genes from different bacterial cultures are also identified to look for NAR, NIR, NOS, NOR, and NOS. Next slide. You've made, na? And from there, you can see the PCR. Next slide, Umesh. You can see the PCR amplified products just to show that a lot of them were picked up. And then they were, again, and the next slide. The next slide. This slide is to show that not all bacteria that were cultured and looked for their these genes were possessing the nitrate reducing genes. They are collectively doing the job. That's what I want to tell by showing this. Because if one bacterium is not able to produce all the set of enzymes, like just two of them could do in this whole collection, or three in fact, because of that, you should not be thinking that the denitrification is not a complete process in the Arabian Sea. The organisms work together and do the job. Next slide. Next slide. Yes. This is another set of work done by Genevieve working with Dr. Belle Damodar Shenoy. What she did was to sequence the whole genome of 3 different organisms capable of both nitrate metabolism, nitrogen metabolism, and also sulfur metabolism. And from here, they found out a large number of enzymes and their correspondent genes through their bioinformatic analysis. And we have the first data set in almost this part of the world to tell that the reduction of nitrate to ammonia is the Anamox process. The organism named the Limnobacter species is capable of doing that. It also can do the job of oxidation of thiosulfate. And next slide, next click, Umesh. Oxidation of thiosulfate to sulfate. And another organism also was checked, and this was able to do the another enzyme. I mean, this is another species. This is also able to do the nitrite to ammonia. This is the Anamox process. And then sulfur metabolism was also found in this Pseudonacardia alni. She had done one more organism. I'm not showing the data. And then see the important 3-4 messages that I wanted to give is that the denitrifying and Anamox bacteria are almost exclusively limited to core OMZ, and the denitrifying bacterial diversity is higher at 250, and the Anamox being higher at 500 meters. There are different genes involved, different organisms. The nitrous oxide reducing gene affiliated to different groups of bacteria. The most Anamox 16S RNA and hydrazine gene based sequences were related to an uncultured yet Candidatus scalindua. This is our work. Next slide, Umesh. Yeah, click all of it. Good. This is the summary of nitrate reduction and sulfate metabolism happens in this. From these 2 slides, I want to tell you that the highest activity in the OMZ is nitrate denitrification. Next is ammonia oxidation, which is far deeper. And the third is the sulfate metabolism. Sulfate metabolism is for the reason that the organisms, when they find that the available nitrate is completely gone away and there's not much of the nitrite that is available or easy to use, they switch over to do the sulfate metabolism. It's not that it's sulfate reducing bacteria are only found in the OMZs, but they're also found in the water column. But in terms of the process, this is the sequence. There is denitrification, ammonia oxidation, and sulfate reduction. The previous slide, I want to thank my commendable efforts by our students like Amara, Genevieve, Mandar, and Jasmine. They worked a lot, and these are the different analysis they carried. Each of them, what they did is mentioned. Some of them quantified even the rates and things like that, which is very good. From our group, there are also work that was done by Anand Jain, Sanjay Singh, and Divya, Baby Divya with Dr. Shanta, Jovita with Dr. Catherine. They've all contributed substantially to the understanding of microbial ecology of the Arabian Sea oxygen minimum zone. Now, the take-home summary is with oceans losing oxygen speedily, the offshore and coastal OMZs are natural laboratories for assessing the adaptation of life to climate change. The OMZs and their microbes contribute considerably to the biogeochemical cycling of essential nutrients. The sampling efforts are exhaustive, and then they've been able to contribute to the understanding of the phylogenetics, the enzyme pathways, and also the rates of some bacterial cultures from the northern Indian Ocean. Then Genevieve actually conducted one preliminary microcosm experiment. From there, the acidification could cause some organisms to become vulnerable, like the oceanospirales and SAR11 clade and also rickettsials. These are microbial groups. And some of them can be adapting, like the campylobacterials, nitrosococcales, rhodospirales, and things like that. So, to my mind, the most predominant processes in the Arabian Sea are denitrification and anaerobic ammonia oxidation. With this, I thank you guys, and thanks once again to KSTA for tolerating me. ನನಗೆ ಈ ಅವಕಾಶ ಒದಗಿಸಿಕೊಟ್ಟು ಕರ್ನಾಟಕದ ಅಕಾಡೆಮಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಸಾರಿ ನನ್ನ ಈ ಪ್ಲಾಟ್ಫಾರ್ಮ್ ಒದಗಿಸಿದ್ದಕ್ಕೆ ನಾನು ಚಿರಋಣಿ, ಮತ್ತೆ ನಿಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ.